Okay, yeah, thanks for coming to the tutorials. So you see that I have slightly changed my topic actually with what advertised because this is more of a tutorial instead of research representation. So I might go a bit more into details about what we are doing, like more of tutorial sessions. Yeah, so I will be discussing about what our research is about, mainly around the topic of deep learning for the inverse problem in imaging, especially medical imaging. So I will go through some of these aspects from this. I'll start with the introduction, and then we'll see a bit of deep learning prerequisite, depending on the audiences. And then we'll discuss about this inverse problem imaging, particularly on memory reconstruction, starting from this compressed sensing formulation to this data-driven reconstruction. And if we have a bit of time, I will also briefly discuss about the inverse problem in the image analysis, which is image registration. I will summarize this in the end. Cool. So we've seen that why we are doing deep learning in medical imaging. So here is a topic review on preparing the healthcare workforce to deliver the digital future. And we've seen from the statistics that 1 minute saved per patient consultation actually equates to a large number of these hours of this, let's say, the A&E consultation time, and also 5 million hours of the GP consultation time. So whenever possible, the adoption of techniques should try to save the time on this and also release more time for the clinicians to focus more on this patient's care. And that's where our AI techniques comes in here. So here we've seen from another papers that this AI method, such as deep learning, can reduce the radiologist and reviewing images by 20%. And considering the amount of the images that we scan each year globally, it's actually also equates to a large number of these radiologists' time back to this clinical care. So that's why we are doing deep learning for this medical imaging. And in fact, this AI in medical imaging can impact the entire imaging workflow, from this acquisition of the signals to the reconstructions and to the semantic interpretation, diagnosis, and treatment. So what we are doing is trying to use this AI to improve the entire medical imaging workflow and to extract clinical useful parameters and to facilitate this process. And before we go into what we discuss, I'll quickly maybe discuss about deep learning. We know that deep learning has shown its power in learning representations. It builds these neural network things to learn this representation from the images, and has also been widely used in the semantic interpretation tasks like segmentations. Maybe I should do a quick survey before going to next slides. Like, any of you who haven't used any CNNs before? No? Or if not, then if you don't mind, raise your hand. So it depends. Okay, so I guess maybe I need to review a bit of CNN in a sense. I'll just do this quickly because I guess that's quite basic for some of you who might do this. So CNNs that employs this image operator in this neural network with learnable filter ways. As you see here, that we have a kernel, and we do this in a sliding window fashion, and we compute these convolutions, which then extract this feature maps here. So I guess you will see a lot of these figures where we built multiple layers of these deep convolutional neural networks interleaved by these pooling layers and also fully connected layers, and to recognize the digits of this. And here we show that here is this convolution operations where we have this omega, which is the weight of these convolutional filters, which performs on these feature maps of the A here, plus some of the biases to compute the representation for the next level of these features. And of course, here you see that then this go through a nonlinearity of this H here, which typically is some sort of nonlinearity, like a sigmoid or ReLU functions here. And here we have this kernel size, if you see my cursor here. So for instance, typically the kernel will be of its 4 dimensions. The first will be the number of these kernels. And then the second dimension will be this will be the dimension, the channel size of the previous images. For instance, here we have an image, just a single channel. So we have one here. That's the channel size. And then we follow by the kernel size of the 5 by 5 window of that. And to train this deep learning things, we know there we need to train this using backpropagations with some sort of loss functions here. We compute the gradients with respect to the previous layers and then backpropagate it to the previous layers and then to optimize the loss function with respect to the parameters of the weights. Yeah. And some of the visual features to see what we actually have learned from this. If you see some of these for the stages, these different feature maps actually capture the different characteristics of this. For instance, here it shows some of the edges and some of the inner side and some of the more abstract levels of these put features. And here also indicates a bit of these visualizations of these convolutional kernels. If you see here, for instance, this one mine captures better of these edges areas of that. Yeah. So I'll only briefly shows a bit of the CNN things. And then we see just now the CNN things is kind of like a feed-forward ways of these neural networks. So another type of neural network I want to briefly mention, because we'll be using this in our research later, is about these recurrent neural networks. So what is recurrent neural networks? We can see here, instead of just using feed-forward things, here we see we have like a recurrency here. Now we maintain like a hidden state up here to maintain this information for the different time steps. We can see here, we mentioned that if we unfold this across the time step, we see there is such hidden-to-hidden connection between each of these neurons, so that this allows the information to propagate, let's say, from the time step t-1 to t and then to t+1, etc. So these RNNs is good at processing these sequential informations. And what's the difference is that it maintains this hidden state, as I show here, that receives input from this, the input feature maps of this xt here, as well as the hidden state of the previous t-1 steps. And a bit of these mathematical representations of this, which may make it a bit easier to understand. What we have here is we receive the input of this x at time point t, and we also have a hidden representation of the h at hidden time step t-1. And we multiply with some of the weight, that is the input weight of this U matrix and the hidden weight of this W matrix here, together with some biases term. And we then have nonlinearities outside of this, and to compute the hidden state at time point t there. Okay, and then with this hidden state, and then we can get the output also by multiplying it with output matrix together with some of the biases terms. Then we get this output representations of that. So what are the good things about these RNNs? As we see here, it can process any length of input because we have this hidden state that can unfold to arbitrary length of these sequences. That's one thing, compared to what we discussed about these feed-forward things. And then the second thing is that the weights are actually shared across these time steps. So each of the weights are shared, which means that the model size will not increase for longer inputs. So whatever the length of the input is, we have the model size will be the same. So lastly, yeah, of course, the reason we use it because we can use the information from many steps back. So to make sure that we can leverage the information that have been memorized from the previous time steps. Okay, yeah, and maybe any questions so far before we move on to the topics we'll be discussing? Yeah. If you have any question, we can always discuss offline because I think many of you have seen this, so I'm not spend too much time. Okay, so what will be? Yeah.
Use always the CNS, the real value CNS. Not like complex value data.
Complex values. There is complex value CNNs as well. Yeah, but that's not that common to use. But there is, yeah, especially for our problems. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, so we'll be discussing this inverse problem in imaging with an application on MRI reconstruction. Yeah. So for some of you who may not be familiar, so MRI reconstruction. Well, to acquire the MR images, well, here's the MR scanner, and we acquire the signals in the frequency domain of the signal, which is we call it as K-space. And with the signals K-space, we can then do this Fourier transform, an inverse Fourier transform to transform the signal from K-space to the image space. That's the image what radiologists interpret. Yeah. So has anyone ever taken an MR exams yourselves? Yeah, so what's your experience?
It's quite long.
Yeah, it's quite long, right? Yeah. Yeah, so typically for this cardiac MR images, I guess for brain is fine. Cardiac typically takes 30 to 45 minutes because it will require multiple sequences, and you will also need some time for breathings because you need to breath hold during the scan. So you need time, like chunks of free breathing time for this. So what we can do is we can accelerate this process. By accelerate this, we can do undersampling the signals. Instead of acquiring every signals, we undersample it, and then we transform to the image space. But due to the violation of library sampling, well, if the acceleration factor is high, then the reconstructed image will actually be very elist. That is hard to interpret, actually. So what we want to do is that we want to reconstruct from these signals to these fully sampled images. And conventionally, people use these compressed sensing reconstructions. And then today we'll be discussing more about these learning-based ones, how to see how we can use deep learning for this. Right, so yeah, we're talking about inverse problems. So maybe we should define a bit about what this inverse problem is. In contrast, the forward problem is actually given an unknown x. We want to measure y, that is from x to y with some operator of a, that is the forward problems. And for the inverse problem, then it will be that given this a and y, we want to determine this x here. And particularly in our problem here, our objective can be formulated as this one, which consists of a data fidelity term, which makes sure that the reconstructed image, which is x, after this Fourier transform and undersampled operation, that it's consistent with the raw data we have acquired. So that is the data fidelity term. But because this is an ill-posed problem, we need to make sure that our results are unique. So we also make some assumptions on the data, such as some regularization term, to make sure that our reconstructed result is feasible and also unique. So that is the inverse problem we have defined here. And as I show again, below that, conventionally people use compressed sensing here. So what does compressed sensing do? So the type. Yeah, sure.
Unknown X. Like that's the.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think yes, you are right. I think here's a mistake here. Yeah, it should be a known x. We want to determine y from x, so it should be a known x. Yeah, yeah. Thanks for pointing this out. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in compressed sensing formulation, recall that we have this regularization term there. So typically, in these formulations, we assume the sparsity in some transform domains of the signals. For instance, here, the first column A will be the fully sampled images. And then the second column will be these images are mapped to some transform domain by specifying transform. For instance, this wavelet transform, these finite differences, and also some temporal frequencies of that. And if we zero out most of the signals in this column B here, and then we reconstruct the image back, that is what we can get of this the column C there. right? So basically, we can actually exploit the sparsity of the signals in these transform domains and then to perform these reconstructions. So that is the core idea of these compressed sensing formulations. I will not go much deeper into that, but we'll discuss a bit about this. So similarly, this is the formulation we have just mentioned. The observation Y in K-space reconstruct image X. So how could we solve this problem? Yeah. Yeah, I guess this was a question for my students for some of the optimization classes. So I will not ask you here, but typically we'll do this gradient descent like a proximal gradient method, alternative minimization, dual problem with UMM. So there are a bunch of optimization techniques that can solve these compressed sensing formulations. But there are also some disadvantages of the CS-based MR reconstruction. Any of you maybe have some ideas? Like what could be the potential limitations of these? Yeah?
Throwing a bunch of information away, it all depends on your regularization.
That's true, yeah. It really depends on how you regularize the data, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing. So, and also it's an optimization-based method. So reconstruction are typically slow. So for the data, especially for these cardiac images, like multiple time sequences, it sometimes takes very long time of that. And also typically because of the regularization, so you might to assume some of the, you need to have a hyperparameter to balance between the terms. So it requires tuning of hyperparameter for each specific scans maybe. And also they don't leverage the prior knowledge of these data of these. So that's what motivates us from compressed sensing to learning-based reconstruction, where we want to explore more of the prior knowledge of the data from the routinely scans we have acquired. Okay, so there are a few ways. I will quickly introduce a bit. So the first way of doing this is to view this reconstruction problem as image post-processing methods, right? So as I mentioned, like image post-processing is we use this deep neural network to reconstruct the image directly from the zero phase images. So typically what we can do is we build this, let's say, a U-net. So we call U-net because it's a U-shaped net. Typically it's good at this dense prediction task because of these scale connections. Let's say it's just a neural network things. And we receive input of these zero field images. So zero field is that if we undersample the data, we fill the rest of this as zeros. So it gives us this reconstructions. And we directly learn the mapping between these zero fitting images to these fully sampled images, just to learn this as a image post-processing task. Yeah? I guess this is quite similar to some image denoising or image super resolution or some similar task of this. Right? Yeah. So what do you think maybe the potential limitations of these kind of approaches? Yeah. Recall that we have required the data, right? The required raw data. So we possibly couldn't guarantee the fidelity of that, right? We didn't really count. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to that equations. We can't possibly guarantee these fidelities here by using these post-processing techniques. So to address this problem, we have proposed another data-driven reconstruction method based on what we have just formulated. As we discussed, we can solve this objective function by using some alternative minimizations, right? So we do one way of this. We introduce some auxiliary variable z and relax this to unconstrained optimization via this penalty method. And then we solve this by using alternative minimization, where we optimize the intermediate variable z and the reconstructions of this x in an alternating fashion and also iteratively. Okay, so this will be the conventional optimization techniques people use to solving these objective functions. So the first equation, if we have a look at this, is actually we can view it as a denoiser or the aliaser, because actually trying to estimate the intermediate variable z from some sort of regularizations here. And the second equation we see it preserves this data fidelity term and solves these objectives. So it is actually equivalent to the data consistencies we want to preserve. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So based on this, how could we formulate into deep neural networks? So we are trying to formulate this similarly in an alternating fashion in deep neural networks. So one of our strategies is we formulate the first denoisers as a deep neural networks, so that instead of uh, explicitly imposing some regularization on the data, such as in compressed sensing, here we are trying to use this deep neural network to learn this from the data that we have acquired, right? And then the second equation, as we mentioned, data consistency layers, and depending on how they are formulated, we can either derive some closed form solutions or solve it via some optimization techniques. But we formulate it in a general form to say that is a data consistency layer in your network, which receives input of this intermediate reconstruction of this Z with some sort of the raw data and these transforms, etc. So we call this type approach as learning, like as model-based deep learning, that is to learn these unrolled optimizations. We see that if we unroll it, we have this DNNs, data consistency, DNN data consistency, that alternatingly updates images till these final reconstructions. And the data consistencies also receive the raw data that we have acquired from the scanner to make sure that the reconstructed images is consistent with what we have acquired in the case space. So that's a method that is motivated by such kind of the unrolled optimization techniques, and we propose to embed it in a deep learning framework.
Sorry, do these unrolled networks, do they have the same, like, do they have any sort of guarantees like in variation methods?
That's a good question. No, we can't guarantee this convergence. That's one of the things with these deep learning things, yeah. And let me discuss about another few works, but then we can say, actually, it's a learning-based method, so the number of these iteration steps need to be fixed when you train this network. Okay, so one of the examples that was proposed earlier, back in 2018, was this cascaded deep neural networks. As you see here, similarly, we have this data-driven regularization, that is this DNNs to model these regularizations of the first step of that. Here, simply, we are using these 5 layers of these deep neural networks, followed by this 3D convolution, because we are dealing with 2D plus time data here. And then for the data consistency, the first work we have been doing is on a single coil acquisitions. Well, to make it simple to understand that we can derive a closed form solutions by simply calculating the gradient of this, set it to 0, we can derive a closed form solution of this form. Because it's closed form, then we can explicitly embed it into a deep neural networks like we have demonstrated there, similar to the previous slides. And then to train this, we similarly use this a fully sampled ground truth, as the ground truth, fully sampled data as a ground truth, and also the predictions of deep neural network to regress them, to use some of the L2 losses, L1 or SSM, etc., to minimize these distances to train this deep neural network. And a bit comparison against this compressed sensing-based method and also before deep learning, the dictionary learning method. We have seen that the deep learning method, I think, which is the second row of this, shows better performance compared to this dictionary learning-based method, which is the last row of that. Obviously, there's fewer errors of here. And in terms of this different undersampling factors, we have also demonstrated a better performance of the CNN compared to this compressed sensing-based approaches, like the L plus S, I think that is a low rank and sparsity maybe, and KTSR also like a deep learning one, a compressed sensing one. So what is a good thing here is that the CNN can achieve a much faster reconstruction for this. Here, compared with the dictionary learning ones, actually is obvious, like significantly much faster of this, like 23 milliseconds versus like 6 hours of this.
All right, so the neural networks basically
Yeah.
So, is there a danger that if you have an out of sample, you can just say that is an artifact of your data consistency?
You mean there's artifacts in this data, right? There's some noises. Mm-hmm.
You have an MRI doesn't have an unusual something.
Yeah.
Will it treat that like an artifact?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we will get back to this maybe after a few slides. Yeah, great questions. Right. So, checking the time. So yeah, so let's say quick just recap on what we just discussed. Our method is motivated by the traditional optimization, and we propose it to model it in the CNNs, a cascaded way of this, right? But as you see here, like, are there any way that we could better model it as this like iterative things, right? Like the traditional optimizations of this. So by observing this, actually, this motivates us to using this recurrent neural network we had just discussed, which can model this sequential information and model this in more of a recurrent way of this. So this, we find some of the links between the optimizations and this recurrency things, okay? And right, and based on this, here we actually propose to embed this iterative optimization in a learning setting with these RNNs. If you see the diagram on the left, instead of using CNNs, we have multiple of these convolutional recurrent neural networks that evolved over both of these iterations and time points. And to be more specific, we first view this optimization as one dimension of this sequence. So in the RNN, we know that multiple sequences, right? So here we view this iterative optimization process as a one-dimensional sequence, and we model this recurrence across these optimization dimensions of this. For instance, here we can have this recurrent neural network over iteration dimension, and if we unfold it, then we have these hidden-to-hidden connections. Recall we have just discussed about errands, these hidden-to-hidden connections across these different iterations. So this actually allows the information that have been learned from previous iterations to be propagated to future ones and make the computation more efficient and potentially avoid some redundant computations of that. And another dimension, because we are also doing dynamic data, so that's cardiac data, we have a beating heart of that. So naturally, this will be like a time sequence of that. So we additionally incorporated these bidirectional convolutional neural networks that the recurrence over time, that propagate information along the temporal dimension in a bidirectional way, because our data is more periodic data in this sense. But at the same time, we also incorporate the information from previous iterations with this blue connections there. So here we propose, to exploit these spatial time redundancies.
So I want to ask, do you still fix the steps like an unknown methods, or do you have some sort of terminating?
There is terminating condition, yeah. So we need to preset the I here, I think. Yeah. So when we train these RNNs, we need to first train, with a fixed number of this the iteration there. By test time, it can be arbitrary either, because for each iteration, as we mentioned, that it actually share weights, right? So because the weights are shared for each iteration, so actually can propagate for arbitrary length. But because this is a learning framework, I don't think I include the results there. Yeah, because this is a learning framework. Our observation, for instance, we train it in our paper. We train it for 10 iteration during training. In testing, we can test it, like say for 15 iterations, 20 iterations. By some point, we'll see it will reach its optimal performance. And then if we further increase this iteration, the performance will drop somehow. Because that was learned with that, right? Yeah.
Let's just ask about the like readout layer or like the last layer of the network. So if you have like an RNN doing like a classification task, you might do something like last layer, like each unit is a category, and you do some sort of operation over time, like max activity over time of the units to read out your decision or like the sum activity. What's the equivalent here for the pixel value?
So the output of these RNNs, right? So instead, what you mentioned is more of a classification, that is to classify a single image as one category. But here we're doing this dense prediction. Actually, we predict a value for each of these pixels.
At every time.
At every time point, yeah. So yes, so basically the output here, let's say maybe just for example, there will be the dimension of that will be the spatial dimension of the image. Yeah.
And so then, does it need to have like a little period for activity to propagate through the network? Like at time point 0, presumably you have activity.
Yes, we will do some initializations at 10.0 for that. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Great. So a bit of a comparison of these RNN network compared to the CNNs we've just discussed. So the message here is that this recurrent neural network is more efficient than this 3D CNNs. I see from the second column we show here is more produces more faithful images compared to 3D CNNs. And more importantly, it also gives a much faster reconstruction speed compared to compressed sensing method, basically. And compared with 3D CNN, it shows a smaller model size because we're shared compared with this 3D CNNs and a higher performance in this case. Okay.
May I ask about
Yeah.
the case you operate? I probably forgot already. Like you have the case space, which is the free space. So,
Yes.
So in the free space you have like the amplitude and phase, and do you have like, but then in the case of MRI, is it like that you have amplitude and phase for every single pixel, and that gives you like, I don't know, 2 channels?
2 channels, yeah, we use 2 channels in this case. So as you mentioned in the beginning of the complex value things, our input data is actually complex value, so it has a real part and image part of the signals. And in these examples, where we use it, we split this into 2 channels. One of the real and another is the image part. But there are other works that use it for complex value CNNs. Yeah.
And yeah, and then you do the estimation there in the case space. And then once you have the final estimate out, then you do like inverse Fourier transform.
We predict in image space, but image also real part and image part, right?
Okay.
Yeah. But we visualize the magnitude images here. Okay. So I'll maybe quickly introduce the more recent work, extension of previous works. So what we have just introduced, we see that there's a single regularization term, and we want to expand it to a bit more complex scenario. That is this multiple regularizations. So here I just take actually a coursework example from one of the courses, where we can see that we have reconstruction of this, which has a regularization on wavelet domain, on this DCT domain, and also total variations of that. But how would we model this kind of formulation in deep neural networks? So here is an example where I show you in a dynamic parallel imaging settings, where instead of using just this XT domain, so the XT domain, which means it's image domain, that is what we have just introduced. We additionally introduce an XF domain, which is the temporal Fourier domain. If you recall the images I've just showed in the compressed sensing information, the last row of that, temporal frequencies. So I will not switch back. But basically, the signals, well, the dynamic signals in this frequency domain is actually very sparse. Basically, it's here, right? So we have this fully sampled data. We have this is alias signals. So the fully sampled signals in this frequency, spatial frequency domain is actually very sparse. So our idea here is to incorporate a complementary regularization to further exploit the data and then to reconstruct images. And here I show this parallel imaging setting because we want to apply this method in a more clinical applicable scenarios. If you have done these MR scans, we know that it actually have multiple coils to acquire the signals at the same time. And we want to apply these approaches in a more clinical applicable scenarios with this parallel imaging. Yeah. So we got a similar idea of how to model these. Again, we use variable splitting and alternating minimizations. If you see here, we introduced some auxiliary variables such as this the U, rho, and sigma I here that allows us to decouple this regularization term with this data consistency term. And then we can split them into these different sub-equations, which allows us to update each of these variables in an alternating fashion and also iteratively. So similarly to what we have just introduced, the idea was to model these regularization terms in a deep neural network and embed those closed form solutions, well, in an explicit way in the deep neural networks. And to have a better look at this, the first equation, as we mentioned, is the XF domain things, the spatial frequency domain. So the first sub-equation is corresponding to reconstruct the signal in this XF domain. And the second equation is corresponding to the signal in this XT domain. And for the third equation, as we see before, this will be a data consistency term. And the difference, a big difference, is here we have this coil-wise data consistency because in parallel imaging we have multiple coils to acquire the data. And the last term, if we solve these equations, we see that will be like a weighted combinations of the previous three ones. And we formulate in this deep neural network. And again, we have these RNs to embed this in access domain, XT domain, coil-wide data consistency, and the weighted coupling of this. And we train in a similar way as we do earlier. And what we can get here is because we use it in a parallel imaging setting. So essentially, we can speed up this further. And here we do it on 16 times acceleration, which allows us to reduce the scan time to 15 seconds for this CINI sequence, which has the potential to realize a single breath hold 2D cardiac imaging. So you just breath hold once, and then you have the whole heart to be acquired. Well, similar ideas of this model-based deep learning, there also other similar works which are inspired by other optimization techniques. For instance, here, there are also variational network, which was inspired by these variational optimizations. There are also some model-driven deep learning methods, similar to what we've done, but they solve this data consistency instead of these coil-wise ones. They solve it in a conjugate gradient descent method in this data consistency. Yes. So I will not go deep into this, but just give you example of what's out there in the literature. Okay, so we've discussed about learning image post-processing. We also discussed about learning unrolled optimization. So another way of doing this, as you just mentioned, we could actually learn in the case space directly. We actually learn this case-based interpolation things. Similar things, we see that instead of using these DNNs, recall in the image post-processing DNNs here, right? So instead of putting it here, we put it back here. We do this interpolation from this raw data directly, and we use some sort of DNA here to learn these interpolations of that. And some recent approach also use, if you know that the implicit neural representations, yeah, they also learn these directly in the K-space as well. Cool, yeah. So a bit of discussions, maybe. What do you think? Well, actually, you've already raised some of the questions on this. Yeah, so what are the potential challenges of these data-driven ML reconstructions? Yeah. Yeah, maybe I will go to this. First one is we know this deep learning is data hungry. We need a lot of data to train this. We can't really train on 10 images, 20 images. So to push this field forward, there have been some efforts. So for instance, there have been this fast MRI challenge that provides, I think, thousands of these knee scans, and I think 7,000 of MR scans that allows us to train the data on. Well, a big difference is this is raw data, which basically means that we have the access to the case-based data. And similarly, last year, we, together with some other universities, that we host this challenge on cardiac MRI as well, which provides like 300 something data on this. So data. Yeah, that's a good question. So there are quite some distribution shift between images that are acquired from different scanners. So because the images are acquired with different protocols, like different settings, so they can appear very differently somehow. So let's say a Siemens scanner, Philips scanner, they can look very different. So that's related to the concern about the generalization capabilities of these deep learning models. So that's indeed one of the concerns of that. Yeah. So another concern, as also you mentioned earlier, is about this. If you look at here, I guess it's very hard. There would be, I'm not an expert, but there would be like a minuscule tear on here, which is here, I think. But if you look at all of these reconstructions, this structure actually is missed. So how much we can trust these deep learning methods, right? Like how reliable are these deep learning models on reconstructing these pathologies? Especially given most of the data are acquired on healthy volunteers. They don't really show any abnormalities, things. Given some patients, can they faithfully reconstruct this? Yes, please.
Yeah, I have kind of a related question, which is it's obviously nice for the clinicians, I guess, to be able to visualize the reconstructed images. But if the goal is detecting a pathology or not, it's always like an unnecessary middle step. Could you just train the classifier with on the reconstructed database? Like, what does the reconstruction add for like a classifier?
Yes, so the downstream, yeah, I think that's a good point. The downstream, of course, once we reconstruct the image, we will send to maybe radiologists to review the image to see, or to say we use some another classifier to diagnose this image to see if there is any pathologies, etc. So your suggestion was, why not we directly classify this from the signals, right? Yeah, that's very good. Actually, we have did some explorations of that. I think I didn't include here, but I could show maybe afterwards that we can directly segment some of the structures from the raw data signals, bypassing this reconstruction stage. Yeah, and actually we discussed with like clinicians about that. Their critics was they don't trust this. They don't trust that, right? Because they can't see the image. They don't really trust the predictions of that. But that's I think that's a very good point, and we are also thinking how we could move that forward.
How do you in general set up the training data? So you said that most of the data is from healthy patients, but then technically you could have you could rebate these different anomalies. So you have sample from, let's say, broken bones and sample from people with cancers and so on and so forth. Different kind of problems. So then you could rebate, make some I don't know, uniform or some whatever Bayesian prior. Because it must be that this deep neural network, which is implicit or more explicit regulator of the problem, then it is dependent on these Bayesian, let's say, fractions, healthy and non-healthy. So how do you or companies typically do it? If companies are doing this deep learning test, I don't know. Is it done in clinic?
Right. So your question was whether, like, I would just rephrase that, whether that would be like, how do we collect this data? Do we cover the entire distributions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here, I guess mostly because of we get more access to data that is healthy, right? So we train most time on healthy subjects, but it appears these challenges when adapting this method. I think it's here we didn't really. I guess that's one of the challenge of that. We couldn't really cover the distributions of the data we could see in clinics. But there are some strategies that could possibly address this. For instance, there are ways to, based on these trained priors, basically this can be a prior knowledge. When adapting it, we also perform some sort of test time adaptation to to personalize these things on these specific test data to see whether that's different scanners or whether that's from a different distribution cohorts, etc.
Because I mean, the undersampling factor, I mean, if you don't undersample, then these priors probably don't matter at all. Right? But once you start to go to this like super fast MRI, you undersample heavily, and then these priors probably pop up. They should have.
Yeah. So currently our strategy is that we train a network for each undersampling factor separately, but there are ways that I could train a uniform model for different undersampling factors or patterns in a more unified way of doing this. Okay, let me see if I have a bit more time. Okay, maybe I could take more questions because I have a. I think we can skip the other part unless you are interested.
It might well be that we've got more questions and the format is sort of profile. So, I mean, if that and we can poll people. Do you want to hear more, or do people feel like they've got a few questions up first?
Make the floor.
Yeah. So who wants more?
Okay. Yeah. So,
Do you want to have
okay, I will do that quickly, hopefully in 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. So the other part of that from let's say from reconstruction, then we'll move on to the analysis, right? Because from image we want to interpret the image. So what interpretation of images includes, let's say, the interpretations of these pathologies, that is the parameter hyperintensities, the alignment of different modalities of the brain scans, some segmentations of these, some super resolutions of the shapes, quality control, and some aorta segmentations. But among all these, I think segmentation might be the easier one, almost a common ones that you have seen. So I'll now be discussing it today. I'll be discussing more about also another US problem in image analysis, that is image registration. Okay, so the image registration similarly is also formulated by these two terms, as we mentioned for the reconstruction, but a bit different here. The data fidelity term will be this image similarities, that measures whether two images, whether they are aligned or not, how similar they are. And another term, similarly, because this is an inverse problem, we need some sort of regularization to make sure that the estimated deformation is unique. So that's how we formulate this, and how deep learning could help with this. As I highlighted, there are three components: the feasible transformations, we can use deep learning to learn that; similarity measure, we can also use deep learning to do that; regularization, we can also incorporate deep learnings. Yeah, maybe first work, our previous work, like 4 years ago, was on learning these feasible transformations and do this joint image segmentation motion trackings. Okay, so what we have proposed here is actually a multitask learnings, where we propose to jointly perform the the segmentations, anatomical segmentations of the heart, as you see here, and also you will see there's a yellow arrows that indicate the deformations that we asking for the motions. And our strategy is that, okay, so we have two branches. The first is the motion estimation branch that estimates the motion from the data. Basically, we have the a target data, like say when we estimate deformation, we have a reference and also a moving image and also a target image. We input it into a Siamese feature network. So the Siamese network is two networks in parallel which shares weights, and then followed by the CNN stuff and RNN component to estimate. Here we do 2D, so that is a 2D displacement field of this between these two images. And then because, let me see. Okay, so this is trained by the motion estimation loss of that. Similarly, this will be a similarity followed by some first order smoothness of this. And if you see here, we don't use any ground truths here because we don't know about the ground truth deformations. It's really hard to estimate. We rely on the similarities of these two images to self-supervisedly learn these motion trackings. And secondly, we are doing these segmentations at the same time. So one of the challenge for this cardiac segmentation that, for instance, in this data, we have 20 frames in one sequence. That's a UK Bell Bank data set. We can't manually label every time point of that because it's very costly. Typically, we only have 2 frames out of 50 that are annotated, which means that this data is actually weakly labeled. So how could we leverage this weakly labeled data set? What we propose is to couple this segmentation with a self-supervised motion estimation branch to leverage this set of data. And here we do not only have a segmentation loss on this labeled data, that is on the 2 frames, but we also have a segmentation loss on those unlabeled data. And here we actually leverage the deformations that are estimated from this motion estimation branch. And then we also coupled these feature encoders to form this as a triplet feature encoder, right? So that to allow the information that has been able to be learned self-supervisedly with the segmentation, with the features to inform the segmentation, basically, to equip it with more of these representations. And to train this network jointly, we are able to simultaneously estimate the anatomical anatomical structures and deformations.
Sorry, how do you estimate the deformation?
Yeah, so the deformation here is on the first branch, right? This will be the deformation actually. That is a 2D displacement field. So we have 2 channels. One is X dimension, another one is Y dimension. And then we use it to warp the moving image to the target image. Basically, it's here. IT will be the intensity map of the target image. And this one, the second term, will be the warped moving image. Yeah, so by using this, we can estimate this, I think this delta here should be the deformation. Yeah. Okay, so this will be a bit analyzations on this UK Bell Bank data sets, and we demonstrate this joint framework is better than single framework. And more importantly, this shows us a much faster analysis speed. As we mentioned, the gift of time thing in the first slides. That would be like 2.2 seconds for 2 frames, less than 10 seconds for the entire sequence, which is much faster than the human annotations. And similarly for the trackings, also show the faster speed compared to the conventional optimization-based approach.
Do you like sample inside to make sure that it's labeling correctly? How, because these are like auto labeling, right?
Sorry.
I mean, so when you're doing the motion tracking, you're like the frames that we don't actually have, it's segmented, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like auto labeling. Almost like.
Okay. Yeah. So for this, we can input it to the bottom part of that. So the bottom part perform the segmentation.
Okay.
Right. You can of course propagate that, right? You based on the estimated deformation field to propagate that. But here, because we have this segmentation also trained, so we directly use this segmentation network to predict segmentation. Basically, the upper branch give us deformation, the bottom one give us the segmentation.
Okay, but what I was trying to find is like, how do you ever validate the deformation that was predicted correctly?
Right, yeah. So that's the bottom right we show here, right? As you see here, yeah, we propagate the segmentation. Sorry, I didn't misunderstand your question. Yeah, we propagate the first one using the deformation. We estimate along the time, and here show the outline of how they preserve this. Yeah. Okay, so I'll do this quickly. So the second one is this regularization thing, right? For regularization, typically we make some assumptions on the data, such as the smoothness, invertibilities, and volume preservation stuff, right? Well, this regularization are generic, but, well, it's good, but they lack some application-specific prior knowledge. We know about the biomechanics of the heart. We have some prior knowledge of how the human heart should move. Can we possibly inform this image registration process with some application-specific biomechanical prior knowledge? So this motivates us to develop this biomechanics neural network to make sure that our registration can be informed with this biomechanics things. So the first idea was quite simple. What we want to do is we want to capture the distribution of this biomechanic knowledge by learning on these biomechanical simulations. Basically, we generate this biomechanic simulation based on these PDEs, and then we learn these variational autoencoders based on these biomechanical simulations, so that to make sure that the latent space we have learned can capture this prior knowledge, the prior distributions of these biomechanical simulations. And once we have this, we just use this variational autoencoder to couple it with our standard similarity losses as this variational autoencoder regularizations, to use it as auto regularization to inform this registration network, so that to make sure that the estimated deformation can fall on the manifold that has been learned by the variational autoencoders, right? So that is biomechanically plausible. And the second way of doing this, to note that we have this variational autoencoder. This is a generative model. Can we generate this biomechanically plausible deformation directly from the latent space? So the second idea would be we change from the previous ones. If you see a bit of changes here, we take this decoder out, and then to perform this latent space exploration for these registrations. Basically, we assume that the information of this biomechanics has already been captured from in the decoder. Basically, given the latent vector, it should generate a biomechanically plausible deformation, but it can generate multiple ones. And to make sure it generates the target one, we use these similarities. The similarities between these images form this the latent space exploration losses of the green ones, and to perform these explorations on the manifold that has been captured, that has been learned from the variational autoencoders. So that's a way that we do this kind of like time optimizations. Basically, we optimize this the losses within this update this latent variable z here, and to find an optimal z that can best align this set of images. Example of showing this is that the images that we have shown here, it can capture better of this tissue incompressibilities of the myocardium. And here show the strain of this, the strain of the heart calculated from the deformation. And we compare with some other clinical works showing that some of the diseases, for instance, I think the DCM shows like a low radial strain and a low of this to peak strains of this. Basically, it was corresponds to aligns with what clinical findings have found. Yeah.
I
It's a reconstructed MRI, let's say. Yeah, it's not undersampled. Yeah, like yeah, image space data. Mm-hmm. For the you mean for the simulations, right? Yeah, it's like the segmentations of from the MRIs, and based on those, we build some biomechanical models to simulate some biomechanical movement of that. Yeah.
So I guess
Mhm.
some people might need to go and do
Yeah.
other things. I don't know whether maybe you want to wrap up and then people can kind of stick around and chat if they have more time to go.
Sure, yeah, great, yeah. So basically, the rest part is similarly like this, like unroll things we discussed, somehow we model the similarities and supervised ways, and that's it. Yeah. So yeah, so here we have most of the work we've done is on GitHub. Download the code if you're interested, and thanks to my team and also the big group there. Yeah.
We should thank Chen
Yeah.
very much.
Thank you.